never wanted to be that guy. The reclusive lake cabin owner who shows up once every few years, scowling at the locals and barking about how things used to be. But I'll admit, the first morning I got back to Harper Lake, I felt the part. It had been 6 years since I'd seen the place. Work, divorce, deployment, you name it. Life had a way of pulling me away from that quiet little patch of forest in upstate Washington. But the moment my boots hit the moss-covered steps of the cabin porch, everything clicked back into place. That's what we want. The smell of cedar, the chirp of lake birds, the faint gurgle of water flowing through the old copper plumbing line beneath the floorboards. This cabin wasn't just a house. It was legacy. My grandfather built it after WII with his own hands. Every log, every beam, every nut and bolt had a story. But what made it truly special, what made it powerful, was something buried deep underground. A private water line. Back in the 50s, my grandfather negotiated with the original township to tap directly into the natural spring feeding the lake. He paid to build the line himself, buried it across the southern bluff, and laid it straight to the cabin and 3 other properties. Before there were roads, before there was an HOA, before people thought property lines could be negotiated over brunt, that pipe still ran flawlessly, which is more than I could say for the rest of the area. The first red flag came on day 2. I was fishing off the dock when a golf cart pulled up on the gravel path above. Bright yellow, covered in stickers, driven by a woman wearing oversized sunglasses and a visor that screamed, "I write citations for fun." She didn't wave, just honked. Twice. I climbed up from the dock. "You the owner of cabin 9? She asked, flipping through a tablet. "Yes, Mom." She blinked, surprised. "We were told you hadn't been here in years." "Doesn't mean I stop owning it." "Well," she sniffed, "I'm Carol, acting president of the Harper Lake HOA. I didn't remember voting on that, mostly because I never joined." She scanned the screen. "You've got an unregistered private utility line running under communal land. That's a clear violation of environmental compliance and HOA Code subsection 4B. I stared at her. "That line's been here since 1952. She smiled tightly. "Well, it's 2025 now and we have rules. You'll need to shut it off or bring it into compliance with the board's water access policy." "I'm not part of the HOA, I said. She paused. "That may have been true before, but after the annexation of the southern bluff and the vote last fall, your property was absorbed into the district. It's all in the packet we mailed." I hadn't received a packet, I told her that. "Well," she said, flipping the tablet back into her bag, "we consider this your first formal notice." And she drove off, just like that. That night, I dug through the cabin's fireproof box, title deed, water rights, surveyor's map from 1973. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. The next morning, I hiked the South Trail to inspect the old service shed where the main valve sat. Still locked, still labeled with my grandfather's name, and still running clear spring water from the source. I hadn't thought about that valve in years. Honestly, I'd forgotten it even existed. But apparently Carol hadn't. Because the very next day, a second cart showed up, this time with 2 men in orange vests and a clipboard. "Routine infrastructure inspection," one of them said. "For why?" "Community water integrity," the other mumbled, avoiding eye contact. I followed them as they walked straight toward my service shed. "Nope," I said. "You're not touching that." They looked at each other. One of them muttered something about board orders. "Show me a warrant or step off my land." They left without argument, but not before one of them pulled out a phone and took a photo of the valve. Something was happening, and I was already 2 steps behind. That evening, I went into town, hit up the county clerk's office, spent 3 hours digging through land usage filings and annexation notices, and that's when I found it. A petition. Buried in the paperwork. From 6 months ago. Proposal to consolidate water oversight under Harper Lake HOA. Only 15 signatures. None from the properties actually built on the original water line. No notice sent to owners of cabin 6-9. Just a quiet, sneaky little vote, filed in summer when most cabin owners were still away. Carol had planned this. She wanted control, not just of dues and landscaping, but of the water. And she'd started with mine. The funny thing is, she didn't know what that pipe really did. She thought it was a relic, a vanity, a nuisance. What she didn't realize, what no one in that boardroom understood, was that I didn't just use the water line. I owned the upstream valve. And once you control the source, you control everything. I should have known they wouldn't stop at a warning. Exactly 3 days after Carol's visit, I received a thick envelope, hand-delivered in a manila folder. No return address, just a red stamp that read, Urgent Code Violation Notice. Inside was a multi-page packet filled with legalese, HOA bylaws, and a polite but firm demand to cease and desist the unauthorized drawing of water from Harper Lake's shared natural resource system. Apparently, they'd decided my family's private water line, which had existed before the HOA, before most of the houses, and quite possibly before Carol learned what power trip meant, was now considered a theft of communal assets. They gave me 10 days to comply, or face a $500 0 daily fine, with the possibility of formal litigation. But here's the thing, they hadn't done their homework. The documents were riddled with assumptions and omissions. Not once did they reference my grandfather's deeded spring access. Not once did they mention the original 1950 permit signed by the county engineer, and certainly not the notarized boundary maps showing the spring head sitting on a parcel that had never been HOA land. I wasn't just angry, I was insulted. So I did what any mildly paranoid, heavily caffeinated former engineer would do. I scanned everything, created 3 encrypted backups, and drove to the county courthouse the next morning. I filed for an official reaffirmation of water access rights, public record, time-stamped. Then I bought a trail cam and mounted it in a pine tree aimed directly at the service shed, because I had a hunch, and sure enough, I was right. 3 nights later, around 2:00 IED, I got an alert on my phone. Motion detected. When I checked the footage, I nearly choked on my coffee. There, in the grainy infrared glow, stood Carol. Khaki jacket, headlamp, gloves. She was crouched in front of the valve box with what looked like a bolt cutter in one hand and a pair of channel locks in the other. She yanked, twisted, froze, then looked straight into the camera lens she hadn't seen, eyes wide as dinner plates. She stood up, gave it the finger, and walked off into the woods like she was in some low-budget survival documentary. I didn't call the cops. Not yet. Instead, I made popcorn, because what happened next was something I had not anticipated. The following afternoon, I got a call from my next-door neighbor, Ed, retired schoolteacher. Walks like his knees are made of peanut brittle, but talks like a Brooklyn cab driver. "Hey," he said, "you having plumbing issues?" "Nope," I replied. "Why?" "Because my faucets are dry as a bone, and I just saw Carol at the community hall yelling into a walkie-talkie about backup tanks." I blinked. "Backup tanks?" "Yup," Ed said, "and the whole north loop's out. No water since sunrise." I hung up and walked outside. Then it hit me. They'd tried to bypass my valve, or worse, tried to shut it off without understanding how the system actually worked. That underground line, it wasn't just feeding my cabin. Over the years, as the neighborhood grew, new construction had quietly tapped into the line as well, without legal permits, without updates to the county registry. They'd been stealing from my grandfather's pipe for decades. And now by trying to cut me off, Carol had accidentally shut down her entire HOA's water grid. Oh, the irony. I walked down the slope to the service shed. Sure enough, the valve had been cranked hard to the right, fully shut. There was even a little HOA tag zip-tied to it, like a child's attempt at an official notice. I turned it back slowly, listened as the lines groaned and filled. By nightfall, the water was flowing again. My neighbor texted me a thank you gif of a dancing fire hydrant. But for Carol, things weren't getting better. That evening, I received a second letter, this one unsigned. Your behavior is creating confusion and instability. For the sake of the community, we demand you relinquish control of the water system to the HOA's Certified Maintenance Division. They wanted me to hand over the key to the source. Not a chance. So I did the next best thing. I drafted my own letter to all residents serviced by the Lakewater line. Due to unauthorized tampering and safety concerns, the Harper spring valve will now be secured with biometric access. Any continued usage of the system without formal agreement may result in disconnection or legal claims. A meeting will be held Friday at 6 p.m. to discuss equitable access and potential billing structures. I printed it, signed it, and hand-delivered one to every mailbox. Carol's included. She wanted control, she should have read the map first. Because in Harper Lake, there's an old saying my grandpa used to mutter whenever someone got too big for their HOA. Never pick a fight with the man who owns the pipes. Friday at 6 p.m. came fast. Too fast for the HOA. I hosted the meeting in front of the cabin. No fancy clubhouse. No pastries on doilies. Just a circle of lawn chairs under a crooked pine and a cooler full of lemonade. I didn't need optics. I had leverage. 15 people showed up. Most were neighbors I hadn't seen in years, some suspicious, others apologetic, and a few downright furious. Ed came, of course, with his folding stool and a notebook that smelled like mothballs. Then there was Megan, the young couple from Lot 12, and even Mr. Hale, the guy who once tried to charge me $50, 0 cent, for a fireworks noise disturbance back in 2018. But guess who didn't show? No surprise there. I figured she was either lawyering up or still trying to twist the shut-off valve back without stripping it again. So I stood, cleared my throat, and spoke in the most non-military tone I could muster. Folks, let's be real. Most of you didn't know this water system existed. You just turned on your taps, and it worked. And that's because it's fed by this cabin's line, built and maintained by my family, with full county approval, for over 70 years. Megan raised her hand, looking sheepish. So, we've been using your water? I nodded. Technically, yes. Illegally, not your fault. But the HOA never had rights to it, and when they tried to cut me off, they cut themselves off. There were murmurs, a few gasps. Someone whispered, "Wait, is that why my toilet screamed last Tuesday?" I held up a folder, full of maps, deeds, permits. I have legal proof. This system predates your homes, and the HOA has no jurisdiction over it. But I'm not here to shut it all down. I'm here to propose something better. A pause. I'll keep the line running. I'll handle maintenance. In return, each connected household pays a small monthly water access fee, enough to cover upkeep and upgrades. Think of it as a subscription, but one with actual pressure. That got a laugh. Most people nodded. Some looked at each other like they'd just learned their kids had been enrolled in Hogwarts without permission. Then a hand shot up. It was Hale. Hold on. What about Carol? She said the HO owned the bluff now. I grinned. She's wrong. The county never finalized that annexation. I confirmed it yesterday. I passed out printed copies of the county's current plat map. It clearly showed the bluff, including the spring head, was still marked as private under the Harper estate. Carol had built her little empire on assumptions, and it was crumbling. But just as the tension started to ease, I heard the crunch of gravel behind us. We all turned, flushed, flustered, and flanked by two men in HOA polo shirts like they were her unpaid security team. One held a clipboard. The other held a phone. Recording.
"Everyone, please disperse," Carol announced. "This meeting is unauthorized and violates HOA assembly policy." And no one moved. "You're trespassing," she added, pointing at me, his raised an eyebrow. "On my land?" She stepped forward, waving a rolled-up form. "You've tampered with essential utilities and endangered the community." "I've preserved the community's access," I shot back. "After you shut off a valve you had no legal right to touch." She opened her mouth, but Hale cut in. "Carol, is it true? Did you file the annexation before it was finalized?" She hesitated. That was all it took. Logan stepped up. "I'm pregnant. You made us go 2 days without water. My husband had to shower at a gas station." Now people were angry. Genuinely angry. Carol tried to turn it back on me. "This is mob rule." I smiled. "No, this is a property owner asserting his rights." "You'd know about that if he'd bothered to check the county file cabinet instead of just your inbox." She snapped. "This entire system is unsustainable." "Funny," I said, walking over to the valve shed, "because it's worked since 1952. Then, in full view of everyone, I opened the panel, tapped the new biometric lock, and let the valve hum softly. The line came to life, like a heartbeat. People clapped. Carol, red-faced and trembling, stormed off with her 2 henchmen, one of whom whispered, "I told you we should have checked the maps." By sundown, the agreement was signed by a majority of the homes serviced by the line. Even the ones outside HOA boundaries asked if they could opt in. I told them yes. And just for fun, I dropped off a new letter at Carol's house. Notice of unauthorized access attempt incident. Logged and archived. Water source protected under Washington Private Utility Act, 1951. To the bottom, I wrote, "Next time, bring a plumber, or a lawyer, or a map," and never heard from her again. But I did start getting monthly checks. It started with a drone, one of those cheap, buzzing quadcopters you buy off Amazon with 4K resolution and just enough flight time to get you sued. I was having my morning coffee when I heard the unmistakable mosquito whine over the tree line. The thing hovered a few feet above the service shed, then zipped in circles around my solar panels, dipped close to the water valve, and, just for flair, floated eye level right outside my kitchen window. It wasn't just nosy. Austerbalus. I stepped out onto the porch, coffee mug still in hand, and gave the drone my best former Navy glare. It wobbled for a second, then zipped back toward the HOA clubhouse like a guilty Roomba. I didn't need GPS to know where it came from. Carol was still at it. See, even though the community had overwhelmingly agreed to the new private utility agreement, and I'd started collecting monthly water use payments legally through a simple app, Carol hadn't taken the loss quietly. She couldn't stand that the angry cabin guy had outmaneuvered her on her own turf. So she pivoted from legal threats to PR warfare. I started seeing posts pop up in the neighborhood Facebook group, phrases like, "Unregulated water monopolies threaten public safety." "Did one man profit off nature?" What if he turns off the water in a tantrum? She even posted a blurry screenshot of my utility agreement with the caption, "Wake up, people. This isn't stewardship, it's extortion." It would have been funny if it weren't so dangerous, because then came the letters. Not from the HOA, but from residents suddenly spooked by Carol's campaign. What if you raise the rates? Can we guarantee year-round access? Who regulates you? I get it. People panic when they think their faucets depend on a single man. But that's the problem. They always had. They just hadn't known until I made it visible. So I held another meeting. Only this time, I brought receipts. Literally, I showed invoices for pipe maintenance, photos of me clearing the spring head each fall, a document trail of compliance going back to my grandfather's era. And for flair, I dropped a certificate from the Department of Environmental Resources verifying the line's minimal ecological impact. And then I brought out the big one, a letter from the County Water Board affirming the cabin's independent spring source was grandfathered, exempt from municipal oversight, and not subject to HOA jurisdiction. Stamped, signed, filed. Someone asked, why do you even bother? I looked him in the eye. Because when you let someone like Carol rewrite the truth long enough, people start to believe her version. And I don't care if you like me. I care that my daughter gets to fish in this lake without us paying some HOA water tax in 10 years. That quieted the room, but it didn't quiet Carol. Because the next morning, I received a cease and desist letter from a private law firm, not about the water, about defamation. She was accusing me of slanderous mischaracterization of character and intent during a public forum in which monetary operations were discussed. Translation, she didn't like that I said she tried to steal my pipes. She demanded a public apology, removal of all community agreements, and get this, control over the water billing platform. You ever laugh so hard you almost choke on oatmeal? I did that later that year. Then I sent her attorney a simple response. Happy to resolve any and all claims in court. Please advise whether your client is prepared to provide documentation that her HOA has jurisdiction over private deeded utility infrastructure laid pre-1953. We'll be requesting discovery on her 2 a.m. valve tampering as video. That was the end of that, but I still wasn't done. Because the thing is, if someone's willing to dig deep to bury you, you better be ready to dig deeper to stand your ground. So I went to the next county meeting and proposed an ordinance. Any newly established HOA within a township must publicly notify and invite review from any legacy infrastructure owners before attempting utility consolidation. It passed unanimously, not because I'm charming, but because half the council members had once fought similar highway power grabs. That ordinance has a name now, Harper Amendment, named after my granddad, the man who once told me, don't argue with people who think bylaws beat bedrock, just wait till their tap runs dry. And here I was, doing exactly that, fortifying our cabin, our rights, our water. By the end of the month, even my HOA dues mysteriously disappeared from the auto debit system. Guess Carol figured it was safer to just let me opt out. I didn't argue. The last thing she wanted was another letter from me. The first check came in a red envelope, slipped into my mailbox like a truce offering. It wasn't much, just $38 and some change, but it was from Lot 12, Megan and her husband, with a little note scribbled in the corner. Thanks for not shutting it all off. Baby Lily appreciates her bubble baths. Then came another, then 3 more. By the end of that week, I had set up a basic online payment portal, secure, transparent, and way easier than HO's clunky member dues system. I called it Harper Flow mostly to honor my grandfather, but also because it sounded like a local indie rock band. Each household connected to the original water line now had a clear, affordable rate. $42.00/month flat. No seasonal hikes, no surprise fees for visual disharmony, like having a yellow hose. Within 30 days, 19 of the 22 houses in the HOA signed the new water agreement. And Carol, she didn't say a word, and she couldn't, because two things happened in the span of one glorious weekend. First, the footage of her breaking into the valve shed, the one I hadn't posted anywhere, somehow made its way to a neighborhood Facebook group. Not by me, of course, but let's just say Ed's grandson has a hobby. Second, the county finalized the Harper Amendment. It hit the local newspaper under the headline, "Cabin Owner Turns HOA Battle into Landmark Utility Ruling." Carol's name wasn't in the article, but everyone knew. Her posts got quieter. The HOA meetings became sparsely attended. Eventually, someone else ran for president and won. By fall, the HOA had officially amended their bylaws to recognize pre-established infrastructure exclusions, meaning they admitted defeat. I printed that line out and framed it right next to the signed first check from Megan. But the story didn't end with paper victories or policy changes. It ended with peace. Because one morning, just before the first snow dusted the lake, I sat on the cabin porch, sipping coffee, real coffee, not instant military mud. And I saw something strange across the trail. A new sign. A wooden, nicely carved to Harper Spring Station in honor of the water that kept us together. Underneath, in small engraved letters, dedicated to the Harper family and their legacy of stewardship, 1952 present. I didn't cry. Okay, maybe a little. Because for all the pettiness, the fines, the midnight sabotage, the HOA nonsense, what endured was something bigger than bylaws. It was continuity of land, of service, of family. A pipe in the ground that reminded people where their water came from, and maybe, just maybe, who they could count on. The funniest part, Carol moved out 3 weeks later. Rumor says she relocated to a suburban development 3 towns over with an HOA 10 times stricter. I wish them luck. And me. I stuck around because when you own the source, you don't just win the game. You write the rules.